The zoning board must find that 4 conditions exist in reviewing an application in order to grant a variance. If all 4 conditions are met, the board can grant approval for a variance from the ordinance. The 4 conditions that must be met are: 1, extraordinary or exceptional circumstances which apply to this parcel alone. 2, preservation of rights that a similar zoned parcel would have. 3, no detriment to adjacent properties. 4, the request is not in such a general nature that the ordinance should be changed. Unlike a decision by the Planning Commission that must be approved or can be overturned by the City Commission, decision by the Zoning Board of Appeals is final. There is no review or opportunity for overturning by the City Commission. The Zoning Enabling Act provides a section 606, Appendix 3. An appeal from a decision of the Zoning Board of Appeals shall be filed within 30 days after the Zoning Board of Appeals issues its decision in writing, signed by the chairperson, if there is a chairperson, or signed by the members of the Zoning Board of Appeals if there is no chairperson, or within 21 days after the Zoning Board of Appeals approves the minutes of its decision. The court may affirm, reverse, or modify the decisions of the Zoning Board of Appeals. The court may make other orders as justice requires. And I don't think we need to go to the audience. I think we got nobody else here. So, okay, we have some minutes that we need to have approved from January 23rd. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. Yes. So, who would entertain a motion to approve the minutes from January 23rd?
I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes.
Okay. Sandra makes the motion.
I'll support.
Supported by Scott. Any additions or deletions on the minutes before I call for a vote? Hearing none, all in favor of approving the minutes signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. They are approved. Applicant hereby requests permission to keep backyard chickens on a lot size of 0.44 acres and to place the chicken coop in the secondary front yard, side yard on the corner lot, south of the southern plane of the home, which would also seem to be the best interest of the neighbors rather than directly in the rear yard, which would be closer to the neighbors. The above is contrary to the following section of the City of Walker's zoning ordinance, section 94-359, backyard chickens. Address is 3278 Milo Street. Property owner's name is Anthony and Justina Meyer. Property is 3278 Milo. Applicant's name and address is same as above. Zoning district is a single-family residential. Use of existing premises, single-family residential. Proposed premise, single-family residential. Applicant states, under exceptional or extraordinary circumstances, we live on the outskirts of our residential area and have only one immediate neighbor to the east. Across the street, north, is a forested area for the Blanchard Nature Center. Directly behind our lot, south, is the city-maintained drainage ditch, roughly 3,120 square feet, and beyond the ditch is 1.35 acre county-owned easement of wooded land. Lastly, our secondary front yard is suitable for an accessory building because it is larger, more private, and further away from our neighbors than our rear yard. Preservation of rights. There are examples of animals permitted on substandard lots in our residential area, including an exception made for keeping a pot-bellied pig. No detriment. The additional space behind our lot ditch, and easement, as well as the forest area across the street, will ensure that our chickens cause no detriment to our neighbors. Our coop is well designed. We keep the coop clean and orderly to eliminate odor. The view to our neighbor's backyard is blocked by a dense row of pine and maple trees. West and south sides further reduce any noise and limit any visual of the chicken coops and the chickens by adjacent neighbors, as it reduces the angle of the view from their windows and their backyard decks. Not a general problem. Our situation is unique because our lot is below the 0.5 acres, standard by only 0.06, and when the parcel consideration is to our surrounding are considered easements, wooded land, fringe neighborhood location, the intent of the ordinance will be upheld. We will comply with every detail of the ordinance, including a minimum setback of 20 feet from dwelling and 10 foot from the lot line. The coop location measures 23 feet from the dwelling and 13 feet from the west lot line coop. Dimensions 3 foot by 6 inches, width 5 foot by 6 inches long, and 6 foot by 6 inches high. Lot line should be 13 feet from the coop, 23 feet from the dwelling. Anything you'd like to add? Dan?
Sure, thanks. I'll give a little bit of background on this case. It's been a couple of months since we've gone through any variance items, so I'll talk through the procedure a little bit and give a little bit of background on the site. So thank you to the Meyers. I think this is the first time we've met, but we've been exchanging some emails about this case, so I appreciate the cooperation here. I will walk through a couple things that I know about the site in terms of what the request is. This is the first thing I'll talk about. So this is the submitted image with the application. What I didn't put in these slides, unfortunately, is a couple of pictures, but I think you have the pictures in your packet of what the coop actually looks like. And so here's the proposed placement, no closer than 23 feet from the dwelling, no closer than 13 feet from the front yard lot line, and dimensions of about 3.5 feet by 5.5 feet by 6.5 feet tall. So a pretty small coop. The ordinance that we have in place, remember we did pass an ordinance for backyard chicken coops in 2017. The maximum area for these coops is 80 square feet, so they're well within that maximum. Maximum height is 8 feet. But there was an observation or a complaint, whatever you want to call it, of potentially improper location of this coop, and then it compelled us to look further into the site and get a better feel for whether that site actually is zoned appropriately. And the real key here is that every homeowner who wants to have a chicken coop or any residential property where a chicken coop is proposed needs to be a ½ acre in area minimum, and this is just under that ½ acre threshold. We also require that these are kept in what we'd consider the rear yard. Where this was situated previously was, I believe, closer to the rear yard, a little bit farther south and probably bordering that county land. But I think when the applicants looked at this more closely, they thought the most appropriate place in their mind was to keep this in that secondary front yard, which is, of course, to the west of that western wall of the home on that side of the lot. So that gives an idea of where it's being proposed, and here are the ordinance triggers that we've had to look at, which I just mentioned. Less than ½ an acre in area, and placement in what we'd call the secondary front yard rather than the rear yard. We, of course, call this a backyard chicken ordinance, not a side or front yard chicken ordinance. On corner lots, it gets tricky to define your front and side and rear yard. It's all kind of one and the same. It's kind of all three at once, right? You have a corner that's not really being used as a front yard. It's kind of on the side of your home, and it almost kind of feels like the backyard if it's behind where the house starts on the main street. But in our ordinance, we technically define that as the secondary front yard, or whatever the street address whatever side of the home is facing the non-street address that defines that secondary front yard. So those are the two flaws with this proposed layout. As you're deciding this case, think about this in both terms, and I'll talk about my findings in both terms. The motion that you pass is going to be set up for you to make the decision on the acreage, and then, of course, you wouldn't want to act on the front yard requirement if the acreage doesn't work for you. So I'd look at the acreage issue first, and then look at that secondary front yard issue, because, of course, if the lot is considered large enough, then you can go ahead and talk about the yard issue. So here's the orientation of the site in relation to the surrounding street network. You see a large open space to the north. That's an extension of the Blandford Nature Center. Otherwise, we're in one of Walker's older platted areas, near the kind of what we'd consider the southeastern border of Walker, in Ward 2, near the border of Grand Rapids, so near that Remembrance and Leonard intersection. Here's a more angled view of the home site, so you can get a picture of what that yard layout looks like. The applicants did mention the drain behind their home. This image here, if this is accurate, makes it appear that that drain easement kind of overarches onto their property by a little bit, but it's mostly on that county property to the south. It is called the Leonard Gardens Drainage District, so this was probably a drain easement that was put in place when this area was platted. The maintenance obligations can go to, if it's public stormwater moving through that drain easement, it goes either to the city or to the county. So there is a considerable drain easement down there in the south end that provides kind of a natural buffer to this site. So jumping into the findings, I'm going to run through kind of pinballing between the two different requests using the 4 findings of fact. So I'll start with the area acreage part of this request, and you heard their comments. They live near the outskirts of a residential area. Only one neighbor to the east. They do live near the Blandford Nature Center, so that gives you a little bit of context for the uniqueness of their lot. What I did for this report, when I'm thinking through these things, I began just making kind of drawings to kind of visualize these things. So what I call Exhibit A is this lot in comparison, just based on the area aspect of this lot being compared to other lots in the same zoning district or in the vicinity. So there are about 2,200, somewhere between 2,200 and 2,300 A-zone lots in Walker. This map picked up most of those lots. The median size for those lots is about a quarter acre, a little over a quarter acre. So this lot is considerably larger than those. It's closer to half an acre, not quite half an acre. It's about 0.41 acres. So you can see how this lot compares with what would be a compliant lot on the right side of the screen there, down to some of the smaller lots in, for example, Chesterfield Heights platted lots are typically like a 60 by 130. So the lots get considerably smaller in the same zoning district. So just sheerly based on the area aspect of this lot, of course, doesn't meet that half-acre threshold that the ordinance committee thought of when we were first talking about having backyard chickens in Walker, but it is quite a bit larger than a lot of other residential lots in Walker. Switching gears, again, speaking to the uniqueness of this lot, but then considering the uniqueness in terms of the placement of the coop within the yards. We want to look at comparing this as a corner lot and looking at the layout of some of these other corner lots in the area. A corner lot can be pretty constrained, and sometimes it almost doesn't have that second front yard. You might have a corner lot where you're right up next to the street right-of-way, and there can be a lot more visual clutter in the yard. And I think if you look at this screen, this is kind of a haphazard way of showing it, but these images are all scaled the same size. So it's showing here the subject lot at the top left corner, and then 2 lots in the same neighborhood within a few blocks of this lot, just to demonstrate kind of the spatial relationships there. You can see that the other 2 home sites are either closer to the front yard lot line or have parking, have other features in the yard that cause a little bit more visual clutter and don't provide for as much screening as you would have for this site. So in my opinion, there's also a unique aspect of this site in that it is more spacious, more expansive than some of the other corner lots in the area. So that secondary front yard placement can be justified by the fact that there is some more space available there in that sense. Moving on to number 2, I know there's a lot of criteria we have to look at, but the preservation of rights one is one that was spoken to in the application in terms of what's the similar right we're talking about here? Well, it's having a animal for whatever purpose you're talking about. I think that there's kind of a utility aspect of having backyard chickens. You can of course raise eggs, but you can also see them as sort of a domestic animal or even a pet in some ways, something that you take care of as a household. Not quite a pet, but when you're thinking in terms of animals, the kinds of visual, odor concerns, noise concerns that you might have with animals being kept in a lot, the comparison with the potbelly pig is probably an apt description here. Remember that the chickens in Walker are not allowed to crow. We're not allowed to have roosters. So that rules out that these chickens are going to be really noisy animals. So you can think about these in terms more of other domestic animals, domestic pets that we've looked at. And last summer we did look at a case where there was a potbelly pig here on Mullins down the street a little ways from this site. There is Bilbo, I think it was Bilbo was that pig.
Yeah,
So there's Bilbo. You can look at the lot layout of the site where this potbelly pig approval was granted. You can look at a similar precedence with what we allow for dogs. Dogs are great, but they also make noise and can cause some nuisance that we want to make sure we control for in our ordinance, where you have a lot of dogs outside that might cause a problem. So a few years ago, before I was here, so you folks who were on the board at that time looked at a case involving 3 dogs on a smaller lot. That eventually materialized into an ordinance amendment to allow 3 dogs up from the 2 that were previously permitted. And then finally, this is kind of a different way of thinking about this, but preservation of rights, thinking about comparing this site to what's over at Blandford Nature Center. Of course, this is not the same zoning district. It's in a different municipality. It's a different landscape. It's a different type of site, but you do have this same type of animal around the corner. So just something to consider, that there is a similar land use being enjoyed by a property owner nearby. The other aspect of preservation of rights is just the aspect of having things in your side yard. So not necessarily the use aspect of this, but the structure aspect of this. So housing something in your secondary front yard. That's where I just wanted to pull up some examples of ordinance, of variance cases where some approvals have been granted, looking specifically at the construction of accessory buildings in either secondary front yards or side yards as opposed to rear yards. So there is a precedence here for some approvals granted. That this is not exhaustive. This only goes a few years back, and it's the cases I could most readily find searching for the terms like side yard, accessory building variance. So there may have been some denials as well, and you still want to look at all of the findings for this specific case. But this is just to show there is some precedence of enjoying the right to have accessory buildings or accessory uses in the side yard in some cases. No detriment. This is a big one that we usually hear the most about. Often we have folks coming in with either a bunch of not very excited neighbors because of a certain request, or a bunch of very supportive neighbors because of a certain request. And the idea being that this may cause a nuisance that will impact the quality of life of the neighboring property owners, may impede the ability to enjoy adjacent lots for residential use. So that's what we're getting at here. What's the detriment? What's the likelihood of a nuisance because of this proposal? And for this one, there are 2 different answers from the applicant. I actually am going to refer to the same image, both in terms of the lot being smaller than would be permitted by the code, and the placement of the coop being in what we'd call the secondary front instead of the back. In both cases, I think we can talk about the distance from adjacent home sites. And in this case, you have a pretty unique situation where you have a lot that If it's placed where they're saying it'll be placed, from the nearest home walls or windows, you have an average distance of about 183 feet. And here's a lot down on, I forget the street, but I pulled it up because it looked big, and of course it was larger than half an acre down on Gridley Street. Just thinking of a hypothetical placement that would be consistent with the code, this one is actually closer to a lot of neighboring windows and doors. So in the sense that we're trying to limit some nuisances by imposing a floor on the size of the lot and restricting these structures to the rear yard because we want to keep them far away from people. This shows that it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. If you have the right lot, you can be actually farther away, even if it's a little bit smaller, even if it's on the side. Finally, is this a general problem? And there's a good response here that I think feeds into some of the other criteria that you're looking at as far as what the applicant stated. But what this is really getting at, in my opinion, is whether we're looking at a trend where we'd be better suited to look at an ordinance amendment than to consider a series of variance requests similar to this one. I was just talking to Andrea before the meeting. We haven't had a lot of requests for chicken coops on small lots. So I don't see this as a general problem. I see this more as a unique circumstance. That being said, I'll leave you with this. This is my last analysis slide. You can look at some different ways to proceed with this. You may consider the conditional approval on the variance itself, or you may table to ask our ordinance committee to loosen up the rules a little bit and see where that goes in terms of having a lower minimum area for chicken coops, maybe calling it backyard and corner yard chicken coops if you want to allow some of these on corner lots in the secondary front yard like this one. So there are different paths you can take, and just to consider that this may be better suited as an ordinance amendment, but I don't necessarily think that it will because we haven't got a lot of calls or requests for smaller chicken coops yet. So based on those findings, my recommendations would be this is a unique enough case. There's enough separation. There's enough buffering. This functions as a lot that's large enough. I think that subject to some conditions that you might consider, like a 20-foot setback from the side street, Werner, 35-foot setback from Milo, and compliance with the other standards in our backyard chicken ordinance, which I'm glad to go over. If you want to ask more about the other rules. I think if they adhere to all those things, you can grant a conditional approval, in my opinion. So I would ask you to consider all this, hear from the applicants, feel free to state your objections or concerns, deliberate, and then, again, before you make the motion on the side yard placement, make sure you talk about the minimum acreage requirement.
Okay.
Yep.
Is that 20-foot setback on Warner from the street or from the property line?
From the property line.
Because right now our ordinance says 10 foot, they've got it 13.
Our ordinance says it's 10 foot from the property line. That is, of course, assuming that you're talking about once it's already in the rear yard. So I was being a little bit more restrictive than that. Because what it is really a 20-foot setback from the secondary front lot line.
20 feet from the house.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're moving it 7 feet in from where they got it.
Yeah, let me check
So
their
that means
map
you gotta
again.
move it.
Yeah, that's a good catch. Let's make sure this makes sense. And I might want to pull up our mapper, our interactive mapper, if we can't figure this out by looking at this image.
See, they're 13 feet
Yeah.
right now. If they move it 7 feet to get to 20, then they're going to be less than 20 feet from the house.
Yeah, that's a good catch. So maybe that was meant to be, may have been meant to be from the front lot line. I don't know that there's any magic in that number other than that we don't want it being right up next to that front lot line on Werner necessarily, in my opinion.
That's off of Milo. I would like to keep it, behind the rear plane of the house.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have a 35-foot setback from the street to the front of the house.
That's right.
Do we want, would in any other case, would we allow it to be adjacent to the house?
There is still that I'm gonna double check, but there's still a required 20-foot separation from a dwelling, so they'd still have to
If
keep
they're
that.
behind the back plane of the house,
Mm-hmm.
that could be considered more rear yard than side yard.
It depends on,
I don't mind the 10 feet from the property line, because usually
Mm-hmm.
along any street, there's already a right of way,
right.
and then the 10 feet is gonna keep it away from the actual street.
Yeah, the actual pavement of the street, if you have a 10-foot setback from the right-of-way, is probably 15
I
or
guess
20.
I'd like to see it increased, you know, the distance off of Milo
Mm-hmm.
back, where they've got it at the back plane of the house. And it doesn't bother me if it's 10 foot minimum from the side property line.
Mm-hmm.
That's just my opinion.
Well, just I'll clarify that I think the 10 feet instead of the 20 feet off Werner makes a lot of sense, and that may have been an error on my part, because the math just doesn't add up otherwise. Otherwise, I'll leave that up to you folks, if you want to. Did everybody understand what Roger said?
Yeah,
So-
yeah. Before we go any further, we need a motion to open the hearing.
I'll make a motion to open the hearing.
Okay, Pat makes the motion.
Support.
Okay, support. And by Roger. All in favor of opening the hearing, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, sign, the hearing is open. Okay, we want to open it up to applicant. Anything you'd like to say at this time? If you do, you got to step to the microphone there. State your name and address for the record, please.
My name's Anthony.
The red button, there's a red button there.
Yeah, there's a center, this
The
is,
center button there,
We're
a
still
large
getting
one,
used
a
to it.
large one there? Is it red? You gotta push it so it's red.
Okay, so it was on.
There you go.
Okay, excellent.
All right.
Okay, my name's Anthony. As you know, this is my wife, Justina. I'd just like to thank Dan for putting together these images and the comparable exhibits. I think that's really helpful to get a perspective of the yard itself. In addition to the utility of backyard chickens, I think it's a very good learning experience for our children. We've got 3 kids, and so they're very excited to continue to take care of the chickens and use that as an environmental experience, but also a learning experience. Other than that, if you have any questions or clarifications about use or about anything else related to that, we could field those questions. I don't have anything particular to add.
Okay.
Other than what's already been addressed.
I'm sure we'll have maybe some here, okay, so,
Sure, yeah.
all right. And I was asking Dan earlier about number of chickens, and I guess our ordinance says 5, no more than 5? Are you aware of that?
Correct, yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
okay. Do you have that many now, or you have more, or what do you got?
So we had 10. We started off with 10.
Okay.
We weren't aware that there was an ordinance, and then
Okay.
we gave several to our neighbor.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay.
not our immediate neighbor.
I was
no.
gonna say, is he gonna be here too?
Yeah, no. A farmer friend who lives out in Belding.
Okay, I
So,
gotcha.
yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, any of the board got any questions for the applicant? Roger?
Do you have electricity out to that coop?
We don't. No. The top of the coop is,
Planning on it for, I know it's cold this last.
yeah. No, they survived. The top of the coop is actually insulated, and it has slide panels to regulate the heat on the inside. So when they're shut, even the water doesn't freeze in the winter in there. So they have, it's relatively dry. There's even a little gutter on the back of the coop to catch rainwater. So it's built, it's well built anyway. So there's not going to be like a fire hazard with electrical wires going out there. So with the insulated and, heat regulated top of the coop, we didn't need to have a heat plate or anything for the water.
Okay, anyone else?
Can't tell from, is any part of your yard fenced by any chance?
No,
How do you keep them at home?
the chickens themselves,
Really?
keep what at home?
The chickens, how they,
How that,
So we do have around the coop, I just built a kind of a temporary run. It's just very simple, chicken wire around there. So they're fully enclosed in. When we let them out of the coop, they just peck around in this area inside the closed run. So they're not free ranging. They're not wandering around. That's right. Yeah, it's closed in on top as well, so they can't fly out.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have one.
Yeah.
Why did you choose this location?
The location laid out
Proposed
here
location, right, why is that, why is that chosen there, that location?
on this
Yes.
image. Yeah, well, for one reason, we thought, full transparency, we don't know who observed or commented on the coop or made the complaint, if that's technically what it was. We assumed that it was our immediate neighbors to the east. And the idea for this location is that it's basically invisible from their property. So we were just trying to take into consideration the aesthetics of, if our neighbors didn't like to see the coop or the chickens for whatever reason, we wanted to keep that out of their view, and that's why we moved to the secondary front yard. We don't have a problem putting it in the rear yard, it's just that it's much more visible, especially from, if you look at the row of pine trees, you follow them down and then they stop, and there's that gap there, and our neighbors also across the street can see into our yard from that angle, and so then it would be visible from there. So the current location is really the angle or the visibility is the least from sort of all directions. And if it would help, we also wouldn't have a problem putting a small wooden privacy fence even coming off from the north plane of our house across that section. We've seen some yards that have privacy fences like that to further block any views. So, but the other thing is that we moved in October when all of these trees were full of leaves. And come winter, all of a sudden, we can see everywhere, and everyone can see into our yard, which is a bit of a surprise. But during the spring and summer, even those big maple trees out front, they block the view to our backyard from the road. So if you're driving down Milo Street, it's very hard to see down that corridor, the secondary front yard. And then, of course, the pine trees and the trees in the back all block the other views. So we thought that was the best, trying to take into consideration our surroundings and the neighbors.
Would you be open to any other type of screening other than a fence or anything?
Yeah, we don't have strong preferences for. Yeah.
Thank you.
I can weigh in with a comment.
Sure.
It's what they call illusion in writing, I think. I can't remember high school English, but we heard a segue to what we're going to hear about in 2 weeks, which is privacy fences on a secondary front yard. So that's actually something we don't permit.
Oh, okay.
There's almost this counterintuitive aspect of what you're proposing here, where you can't have you have to screen to a reasonable degree the chickens, but you can't have a 6-foot privacy fence in any front yard or anywhere in front of those front planes of the home. So that's just something to keep in mind. It seems like there's a pretty good mix of vegetation here that provides some natural screening. It might be reasonable to ask for some more landscape type screening, but the privacy fence out there for now is not permitted.
Right. Okay, any other comment? Questions? Okay, now what Roger's talking about, sliding that back a little further, is that what you were getting at, Roger? To the back plane of the house?
According to what Dan has, is 35 feet from the property line off of Milo.
Yep.
That's the front of the house.
Yes.
I guess I would like to see it no closer than the rear plane of the back of the house.
Yeah, I know you're getting at. I don't know
So
about me.
just about 10
If you
feet
moved it up to the
north
side
of
the
where.
house, then that's gonna increase the visibility he's talking about off of Milo. From that front maple tree, and I believe that's a lilac on the corner there. That smaller one. So in grass in bloom, you can't see back there. But if you let them move it further north, and it may not be these people, this variance goes with that property.
Correct.
Yeah, right.
So if the next people, if you don't live there, somebody else wants to move that close to the front of the house,
Yeah,
if I like to take care of that at this point.
yeah.
To
If
how-
we could keep the front edge of that, the northern edge of that chicken coop behind the back plane of the house, which I
So-
assume that, according to this, that's where you got it.
In the immediate stage before the current location, that's where I actually proposed it to be, just about 10 feet north of where it currently is, because then the view from the neighbors on our east side would be completely blocked. But I think that was through the suggestion that it was south of that south plane. I forget the exact reasoning, but we wouldn't have a problem.
I think where it
this
is
is-
now, if you're behind
yeah.
that back plane of the house,
Yeah,
from your east neighbors over there, your deck railing's gotta block some of that too.
it does. And they do have a fence, a privacy fence between our houses. So
See that, yeah.
it's difficult to see the coop from that angle. Yeah.
Is the spot in the grass, is that where it was before? Or is that kind of-
No, that's a herb garden that was there by the previous neighbors.
The weed garden that was there.
We're excited to see what comes up. We don't know what they planted.
I know the people that used to.
Okay, the Frosts, yeah.
They weren't gardeners.
Yeah.
All righty then. So, any other questions for the applicant? Okay, this is for the actual building, or the building versus not having enough acreage, is that correct?
It's, the whole thing being on a lot that's less than a half an acre in
Yeah,
area. And
right.
then where you place the coop being in the secondary
Yes.
front yard.
Yes, yes. Okay. Everybody understand that?
Yes.
Okay. All right,
Tackle first.
that's what we're gonna tackle.
Okay.
We ain't tackling the chickens right now, so.
Okay.
We're gonna do the bill. Okay, all right. Because if we don't do this first, it's going to be pretty hard to put the chickens in there, okay?
So we're gonna talk about the acreage then?
Yes, the side yard, we need the side yard, right? The placement of this chicken coop in the side yard. Is that correct? That's what we're dealing with, huh?
That's the second part.
Yes. Okay. The acreage, okay.
Well, I can start.
Go ahead. Yeah,
So
very happy.
I don't particularly see a problem with it because if we do, I did a little bit of math here and we do have that drainage easement through there. If we had that, it's kind of unique to their lot. Who's to say that wouldn't have been on that lot? Probably wouldn't have been a lot, something, anyway, back in that day. I don't see why we couldn't add, in my mind, that .09 tenths of an acre to there to get them to, well, they'd be really close to half an acre. They're just a little bit short, but, kind of when I did the math, I looked at that and went, well, we got the half acre. If we can maybe say, yeah, that easement works for what they're doing here.
Yeah,
It almost gets you to the 150 by 150, or you're just a little short in
Yeah.
one direction.
Yeah.
I think that's 40 by 120, that,
Yeah, I'm not sure about the easement.
the
This,
easement part, I thought I read the measurements is 40 by 120.
yeah, it probably shows it on that
yeah, it
other
probably does.
graphic.
Yeah,
So if
graphic.
you add that square footage there, lot divided, blah, blah, it comes out to 4.999 something,
Okay.
in my,
Mm-hmm.
so my opinion is, I don't see a problem with the acreage thing because of that situation.
Okay.
Nobody's ever gonna buy that.
No,
Correct.
no,
So,
right.
and, yes, I mean, it's not to be available, it's just, it's not there.
Yeah, but plus you have.
Drainage easement, correct?
Drainage easement, yeah, right.
There I started.
Okay. So is that what you're saying,
Is
is
that a
that,
motion?
is that a motion, or is that what makes the property unique, okay, or,
Sure.
okay? I'm on to help you along there.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't know I was making a motion. I thought we were talking about.
I'll just say for
ahead.
these motions, for the record, if whatever you want to add to these findings, otherwise, if you're just silent on their responses, we're just going to have in our minutes that you are agreeing with their responses on the findings. That's how we've typically done it in the past.
So actually, the next one, we're gonna be talking about a actual placement of the chicken coop, or not, or this, we're doing it now.
I would make a motion on the acreage first.
Yeah, so we're gonna
make
do
sure
just the
you're-
acreage right now.
Yep.
That's what I'm getting, right. Huh? Yes, yes. Okay, motion by Randy, with those reasons and grounds, what the applicant stated, okay? Supported by Brian. Any other questions or comments on that motion before I call for a vote? Hearing none, all in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. It is passed, okay? Now we gotta take up the placement of the building and the whatever, that's the side yard or whatever we got. And the placement of the chicken coop, right?
So Dan, what do you recommend from the side yard what's our minimum requirement, 20 feet there?
Well, the minimum front yard setback is 35.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think Roger had a tangible idea that you could consider, which is just requiring that the coop is farther south than the southernmost plane of the home, so that keeps it well off the Milo, which is really the functional main front yard. Keep it off that setback. And then I had a number of 20-foot setback from the Werner lot line, but 10 may be more appropriate, and I think that's what Roger said.
What does the ordinance say?
The ordinance says...
From a side yard lot,
Yeah.
side yard lot line, what does the ordinance require us to do?
Yeah, the ordinance says 10 feet from the
10
lot
feet,
line.
okay, perfect.
And that's
Good. So that 20, that's why I'm getting confused,
Yeah.
that 20 confusing or something.
And I might have, I might have had that in there because it's another front lot line.
So if we were to
it's-
say, we have a corner lot, let's decide what our front yard is. It's Milo, right?
Right.
I mean, let's just give them a break. They got two, but the house orients to the north on Milo. So technically, they have a side lot line on Werner, which means they could technically be 10 feet from that if it wasn't a corner lot.
That's right.
So I guess I don't really see a problem if we keep it behind the back plane of the house.
If
they're
it
actually
wasn't a
15.
corner lot.
Correct.
It had
If
to
it
be
was-
in the backyard.
Right.
You
Yes.
have to put it behind the.
Then they would
rear
be
face
in
of the house.
compliance.
And you still have to be 10 foot from any of the property lines.
Right, exactly. They're just treating it like, yeah,
I
exactly.
mean, otherwise it's gotta be 35 and 35, and
Yeah.
we don't
Yeah.
want 35. and
No,
That'd be
No,
dumb.
Yeah.
I would just make it the back plane of the house, as long
Yeah.
as he's at or south of the back.
plane of the house,
Perfect.
yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
That's
You wanna keep them
that's
at the
rear yard.
13, or don't we have to get all into that 13 or 10, or what do we gotta do?
I wouldn't personally.
No.
I'd say that given some flexibility on the exact placement is.
And I think we just go the back plane of the house and
10 feet.
10 foot side. You know, I think that's,
Is that a motion, Roger?
yep, he says, okay. Roger makes that motion with those stipulation, okay? Supported by Pat. Any other comments or questions on the motion before I call for a vote? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Pose same sign, it's granted. So, now, is that it? We don't have to go for chickens or nothing, right? Nope, okay, we're all set. No more chickens. All right, we're all set. We need a signature.
I guess
Go
I will
ahead.
say the ordinance is assumed, so
Yeah.
if we got a complaint that there were 10
Yes.
chickens on the lot, we'd have to enforce on
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
But
You know, I asked him that. He said he
Do we
was
need to-
aware of that. So.
Do you wanna address anything with the neighbors? Does it-
Like what?
I don't, that,
Okay.
we didn't get anything specific from the neighbors,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, I'd say if there was a complaint, they would have been here, or a
Yeah.
letter or something.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah,
They're
just
not,
so
they're not
everybody
here and they
knows.
haven't given us nothing in writing either, so.
Yeah, but I just wanna make
Yeah.
sure that they
All right.
don't get
Yeah,
in trouble
there's-
when they get home.
Right, no, and there wasn't, as far as I know, no specific concerns from the neighbors.
I need a signature here with Roger, right here.
Okay.
Sure.
Well, thank you all, though, for your time.
Okay.
From both of us, or just one?
Just up here too.
Okay. Well, that's good to check.
Yeah.
Consider,
You know,
I
and then,
understand people didn't.
right. But a lot of people don't do that, so I want to thank you both for thinking of them and your kids and the learning experience you're going to be having with them.
Yeah. We've always lived in smaller spaces, so this is the first time. So we have to get along very So we've always really enjoyed it.
Good. Welcome to Walker.
Thank you.
That's a good question. We'll make sure we get that. I'll work with you guys. It's not our process.
Yeah.
Just all that.
Yeah. Did you, Anthony, did you understand everything was in that motion as far as the setbacks and the whatever? Okay, cool, all right. Yep, yeah, just so you know, okay, all right.
That's a heavy.
I imagine, insulated and whatever, I imagine it is.
The landscaping friend with the skid steer.
Oh, yeah, well, that helps out, yeah, yeah.
600 pounds.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good evening. Yep. Yep.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Yep. Anything else, Dan, that we got on the agenda or not?
We have an old familiar address, 1587 Harding. Again, it was the privacy fence case we looked at last November. Craig
Yeah.
looks excited.
Yeah.
Not to discuss it too much, but
Hey, make sure that I'm sitting right next to Bob.
well, yeah.
I can't be absent, no?
For those of you who weren't here in November, we'll give you some history for the
Okay.
next meeting.
All right.
in the
Okay.
packet.
Give them the YouTube channel.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the only thing we got on the agenda.
That's it for April 10th and nothing for April
Okay.
24th. So
Okay.
it's a slower year. It's
Okay.
definitely a slower year
Wow.
than some we've had in the past.
Well, maybe because we
okay.
have a longer winter, everybody ain't gotten gear yet or something. I
That
don't
could
know.
be.
Well, we'll find out. Okay, I
That
guess,
privacy fence that we've had taken down last year on Ripens and Marlin. Is there anything you can do to get that mess cleaned up?
I will take note. We'll have somebody go look at
They
it.
took the fence down, but they
Yeah.
totally junked the yard.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if the owner has changed hands, but
On the corner of Marlin and Ripens. You know, Ripens used to come out onto Mullins, and they blocked that off.
Yeah.
It's on the next corner down. That was the one that came out in the side yard.
yeah,
yep.
Yeah.
6 foot high old
Yeah.
fence, and we had them tear it down.
yep,
And that backyard is just, the whole yard is a mess.
yeah.
Should've cut the fence up.
Then you wouldn't have seen the mess.
They create their own problem.
Over the winter, it's not-
Brian's got an answer.
Yeah, I know. Okay, I guess we have no other business.
Motion we adjourn.
Okay.
I'll second it.
I'll second it. Okay, Randy seconds it. All in favor of adjourning, signify by saying aye. Aye. Both same sign, we are adjourned.